Today, the role and responsibility of the government is to let the parents know that they need to be aware of what their children are watching.
告动画公司这件事情本身是很荒谬的，所以我同意他们的观点。我觉得这个动画公司不应该为这件事情负任何直接的法律责任。
我们国家的法律是这样的，就是法院是不告不理。
It's our responsibility as parents and as people to limit what we are going to and not going to watch.
We all watched some cartoons when we were kids, and in fact, we may still do as grown-ups. To many of us, cartoons are equivalent to fairy tales, stories of joy, purity, and adventure. There's one Chinese cartoon series called Pleasant Gold and Big Big Wolf that's been very popular in recent years. Just the theater version alone has brought in over 1 billion RMB in box office revenues, which is very pleasing to producers. However, the goats and wolves have caused quite some unpleasantness lately and gotten themselves into big legal trouble. On December 18, 2013, the first trial was announced for a childhood violence case involving the Chinese cartoon series Pleasant Gold and Big Big Wolf. While the court ordered the parents of the boy who committed the act to pay 65% of the compensation to the victims, the cartoon studio was asked to pay 15%. Last April, the 9-year-old boy had tried to imitate a plot in the cartoon series where the wolf ties the goats to a tree and tries to cook them. Since it came out in 2005, the series has shown the big wolf being hit nearly 10,000 times and electrified almost 2,000 times. Other violent behaviors such as burning and slashing with knives have also been featured.
我们应该审视我们的产量背后，其实我们的质量，特别是我们那些内容方面、艺术表现形式方面，是不是也存在着过于的宣扬了这些不健康、不适合特别低龄孩子观看的这些内容。
The Pleasant Goats aren't alone. An online survey shows that 46% of people think Chinese cartoons contain too much violence, and 36% didn't feel so. While similar incidents have occurred before, this was the first time a cartoon studio has been taken to court. The studio has filed an appeal against the judgment. So should the goats and wolves be responsible for a case like this? We have invited a number of people here in the studio today to talk about this. And sitting here with me are our two main guests, Tom from United States and working in advertising, Lao Gu from China and working in public relations. Sitting across from us are three contributors to the discussion. Chris from England, you work in cartoon design. Sandy Shan is a lawyer from Shanghai, and Mike from the States as well, but you are married to a Chinese woman and have a 5-year-old son. I want to start with the basic question with Tom first. So do you think in this case, the cartoon company have any responsibility at all?
Not any responsibility in a legal sense. Although I'm not a lawyer, I would imagine that any type of punitive damage would be based on direct causal evidence that the cartoon actually triggered the guy to, the little boy to cause the harm and not some other factor.
老顾，你同意他们的说法吗？
告动画公司这件事情本身是很荒谬的，所以我同意他们的观点。我觉得这个动画公司不应该为这件事情负任何直接的法律责任。
法律责任，
这个动画公司是不是应该负一些社会责任？这个可能是，但是这是一个整个社会的问题。
单律师，这个事情你怎么看？从一个律师法律的角度，这样的一个判决，到底有没有它的一个法律依据啊？
那以我个人之见，它是有法律上的责任。
为什么呢？
它实际上是违反了《未成年人保护法》第34条，就是禁止传播带有暴力、淫秽、赌博或者这些不良的行为是禁止的，给未成年人造成影响的，应当要承担责任。
就是这个事情本身，好像跟那个没有一个直接的关系啊。
假如《喜羊羊灰太狼》这个剧没有播放，是不是这些儿童也会模仿把人绑在树上进行烧呢？
对啊，你怎么知道不会呢？
但是我认为这个可能性有，但不大。 但是看了这个电影以后，让他有这样一个想法，所以在这个方面，我认为是有因果关系的。
But it's a very slippery slope when we are making our decisions based on what could possibly happen if a child does watch this, or the probability of inciting any unsocial behavior.
看了冯小刚的电影，你可能觉得会去模仿当贼，他有拍了《天下无贼》。看了张艺谋的电影，他可能会想说，所有的女孩子都把她们的外套脱了，去托起她们，这也是不行的，对吗？这么多年来，从40年前到现在，半夜鸡叫，我们是不是应该学周扒皮的话？一定有人学周扒皮啊，那是不是应该由动画公司负责？哎，黑猫警长也有很多这种恶作剧的东西。
刚刚老顾举了很多例子，但是老顾你没有说这个动画片或这个电影看了以后有什么损害结果？
但是没有发生，
没发生啊，
因为它没有
发生，是因为当时的人没有这么强的法律意识，你也不知道。实际上，在70年代、80年代，小孩子看完电影学坏人之间的打仗，模仿太多了。小孩从来不学英雄人物的，学的都是坏蛋。
Mike and Chris, what do you guys think? You think this company should be legally responsible at all?
As a parent, I think most of the responsibility falls on the parent themselves to protect your child from what they see.
Which means you don't think the cartoon company should be sued in court?
Not at all. If the law doesn't specifically say that we can't have that type of
content
in there, it's our responsibility as parents and as people to limit what we are going to and not going to watch.
Chris, what do you think?
I think the studio has every right to include actually anything they want in the show. It's up to the regulatory bodies that control what goes onto TV to decide if that's appropriate. And if the studio continues to make these kind of errors in the eyes of that body, then that show will not continue to be made.
This seems to me to be a very insecure action on the part of the court. To have a legal court point the finger capriciously and seemingly randomly at a manufacturer of a cartoon company makes the government seem small, makes the court seem small. I think that the government should be standing up and with its own confidence of how it wants to manage its relationship with the people.
这个问题，我们国家的法律是这样的，就是法院是不告不理。
Actually, a lot of Chinese people are thinking about that, and they're talking about this on the internet. Why don't we take a listen?
我觉得动画公司应该受罚。中国人不是有句话叫杀一儆百吗？我认为只有罚钱才能管事儿。
为什么让制作公司买单啊？因为他们也是按照现有的审查制度来做的呀。好，结果出了事儿，又要让他们买单，这合理吗？
The cartoon company is responsible, and they should pay. The scene where the goat is roasted is violent. Kids like to imitate, and they don't understand that it could cause trouble or harm.
I don't question the court, but according to which rule of law did the court make this judgment?
In China, it is not possible to have your cake and eat it too. You cannot, on one hand, be encouraging people to liberate their creative capabilities, and on the other hand, not trust them to make basic decisions of what to produce and what to consume. And I personally believe that unless the government realizes that its relationship with the people needs to evolve, China will never be able to sustain its economic growth.
Do you agree with that? And was this ever an issue in England?
I think it can certainly be a hindrance to creativity because studios are not going to be so willing to, say, take risks, with what they produce. My previous company in China, we often didn't know what SAFT were going to approve or disapprove of. There was no clear guidelines, and that was something that meant we would never make something that we weren't sure about. Even if it was slightly risky, we wouldn't do it.
如果是教育的产品，在很多文艺作品当中，都是要告诉人们善与恶的，对吗？如果说我只表现善，而不告诉人家恶是什么，将来他跟谁斗他都不知道。
Perhaps 30 years ago, the role of the government would be to stop the production of this content. Today, the role and responsibility of the government is to let the parents know that they need to be aware of what their children are watching.
我希望 应该是政府直接站出来去替那个制作公司承担责任。
So responsible or not, whose responsibility is it? Is it legal? Is it moral? Is it social? The debate can go on forever. But the most important thing is we need to find a way to prevent things like this from happening again in the future, right? So we'll talk more about this brilliant idea when we come back on Voices.
Shootings, stabbings, and pieces of bodies. Many cartoons we're familiar with are filled with bloody, violent, or sexually suggestive scenes. Some suggest the Pleasant Goat case provides a good opportunity for us to think about a rating system for cartoons in China. In many countries, rating systems have been applied to cartoons, movies, and TV series for decades, with clear-cut categories based on viewer demographics and specific content. Proposals for such a system have been brought up in China many times over the years, but nothing has yet been done.
Okay, welcome back to Voices. As we just saw in the video, in many countries, they use this rating system to solve this problem. We actually touched upon this just a little bit in the first part. Do you agree that a rating system will fix everything?
No, there's no cure-all, but I agree that the rating system or some kind of parental warning gives parents the option of letting their kids watch something that they know to have material that requires parental discretion or not. It puts the responsibility very clearly in the hands of the parents.
但是在中国哈有一个问题，其实这是一个普遍的教育，就又回到刚才汤姆刚才讲的，政府呢可以有这么一个分级制度，但是呢，政府同样要告诉这些家长们，你们要遵守这个制度，来主动的保护你们的孩子。
所以你的意思是在中国的家长
中国有个问题，很多车有一个天窗，有一个天窗。 我们就在马路上看到很多小孩儿，他们站在这个天窗的外面，对吗？来招手，他们的家长对这个也根本就不在乎。
所以你的意思是，哪怕我们有这样一个分级制度，可能我们的家长也未必就会去遵守。
我的意思是说，分级制度一定要有，但是我们要告诉这些家长们，你们一定要遵守这个，因为这个是对你们及你们的孩子有好处的。
We know Japan has a very mature cartoon market, and they have a very detailed and sophisticated rating system. It's based on the different audience group. For example, for children between 6 and 11, that's what they call children's manga. A very famous one is Doraemon. But it doesn't stop tragedies from happening. In 2007, a Japanese girl, 16-year-old, she killed her father right before the last episode of a very famous series called School Days went on air. And as a result, the show was suspended, and the cartoon studio was asked to modify a very similar scene in the cartoon. So even in a place like Japan, where we have a very sophisticated rating system, bad things still happen. Who is there to provide a safeguard? Mike, you have a 5-year-old son?
Yep.
I bet he watches cartoons.
He does. What I usually do is I'll take him aside, or I'll sit down with him after the fact, and I'll say, okay, look, they were hitting him, they were beating him up. 那在他的现实生活中，如果出现这样的一些情况，他应该怎么办？他觉得西洋洋这样做的是对还是不对？他自己如果遇到这样的情况，是不是应该怎么做？如果他这样做是对还是不对
This is a profoundly Western point of view,
Yes,
I
I
have
was
to
going to
say.
say, yes, very
and
westernized
I'm not saying it's
father.
right or not. What you're trying to do is turn them into people who are independent and capable of assessing the world on their own terms. China doesn't believe that. China believes that there is right and wrong.
We actually have a Chinese parent here. 单律师，你女儿10岁，
对，
她小时候肯定也看动画片啊。
不仅仅是那个动画片，还有一些电视剧里面都有一些画面已经看了，我也不知道下一步会播放这个情景，但是要接近这个情景的时候，我女儿她自己会把眼睛这样遮起来。其实她知道他们要做什么事情。那我后面，然后还问我妈妈结束了没有？那我结束了，我叫她眼睛拿开，我就感觉这个就
怎么会有这个意识去做这样的一个自我保护的措施呢？
他认为这个是他不应该看的，比如说一个男女青年在准备接吻啊或者怎么样，因为我跟他讲，我说你应该看一些小朋友的就是电影嘛，他现在已经看到，有时候会看到我们 夜晚的成人的电视剧，但是我们的电视剧都还没分类嘛，我也不知道下一步要演什么东西，对不对？
Chris, I have a question for you. Does cartoon companies have, in China now, have any kind of warning in the content itself, warning parents or the children, if they're older, that, there might be inappropriate content coming up next?
Not as far as I know. The only regulation that would happen is we would send scripts to SAFT, and they would send back with notes or approved or disapproved. And then once it was made, we'd send that to SAFT, and then that would get sent back to us again. The studio has every right to make any product it wants. It's the job of the people that broadcast this and allow it to be broadcast to decide if it's appropriate.
How does it work in England?
Well, every TV station that wants to be broadcast in Britain has to have an Ofcom license. And Ofcom is a government-approved body which approves what's suitable for TV. And Ofcom will publish a set of, it's called the Broadcasting Code. And in that, it's not specifically saying what you can and can't show, but it gives you guidelines. And a lot of it's common sense, but there's certain guidelines. For example, it recommends that you don't show incidents which could be easily recreated in the home with household objects.
中国做电视台的人比在美国任何一个、在英国任何一个做电视台的人，他审片的时间都要多得多。
给我们讲讲你以前审影视剧作品、审那个卡通的故事。
按理说，你刚才说的，如果是 SAFT， 因为 SAFT 它每一个出来，它有一个 permit 出来，它每一个 permit 呢都有一个 code。按理说你 if 一个 production 是有这个 code， 它就应该可以 for mass broadcast。
对。
但是中国不行啊，你还是要在播之前要看几遍呢？3遍。
The government already has lots of guidelines, but there is a difference between guidelines or censorship, depending on what we call it or what the system is, and responsibility. In an evolved society, the parents take responsibility for the actions of their children, and they recognize that the government is not 无处不在的。
政府他应该更明白自己应该做什么。就像你说的，应该调整叫 evolve 他这个和老百姓的关系，也要知道什么时候呢，他应该 take responsibility， 什么时候呢，要充分的 trust the 这个 ability of independent thinking and judgment of the public itself.
So sorry, but this is the fundamental question of China today: is how much should the government trust its own people, and how much are they capable of being trusted?
Why don't you take a listen at what people have to say about the rating system on the internet?
很多中国的家长根本就没这个意识，哪些是适合，哪些是不适合孩子看的。比如我去电影院嘛，我就经常遇到一些家长带着孩子在那看电影，也不管里面放的是暴力的，还是恐怖的，还是色情的，还有些孩子当场就吓得哇哇哭了。所以我觉得吧，只有这个分级了，才能改变这种情况。
你们真的觉得分级就有用了吗？我看有些暴力根本不是画面能展现出来的。如果只是用多少血掉多少脑袋来分级，那也根本解决不了什么问题。
Tom and Jerry is also pretty violent, but CCTV has been airing it for over 2 decades. We need to have a rating system. Don't use administrative measures, use regulations.
The cartoon company needs to be punished, but the Broadcast Review Authority should also be punished. Above all, parents need to take responsibility.
After the discussion, we have come up with a chart that sort of summarizes what we have talked about, and this is how we understand the issue here. If you see there's children that we need to protect, and then there are the cartoon producers, the broadcasters, the parents, and outside, it's the legal framework.
I don't think that cartoon producers should be inside that circle at all, to be honest. I think that should be an outside feeding into the broadcast.
I think the operative word here is responsibility towards children. I mean, you wouldn't disagree that a cartoon producer has to have the welfare of children in mind as they come up with its storyline.
Right, if you produce something that no one wants to broadcast.
And it evolves over time, you know. If a cartoon producer consistently produces something that's inappropriate, then they're going to modify their content over time to meet those guidelines.
Oh, interesting. That's a school of thought, right? That's what we do here, to hear different voices. That was quite a discussion. I think I'll let you go and have a break now, but when we come back, I'll have a memory test for everyone. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Voices. Now it's game time. So I need to ask all of you to watch the following video clip with great attention because I'll ask you a question afterwards and it's going to test your memory. And bear in mind, this is a video clip that's designed for children under 5 years old. Ready?
喜羊羊，我一定会。老婆，别追了，饶命啊！天天让我喝杂草汤，看我不教训你！哎呀！谁？可恶啊！臭狗熊，你们又来捣乱！
So my question is, for kids under 5 years old, how many scenes in that clip are inappropriate for them?
Hong Tai Lang chasing Hui Tai Lang with the frying pan and him screaming, "No, don't kill me," you know.
I personally think that it's the realistic ones that are very inappropriate.
For example?
Wasn't there one with a buzzsaw going across a fairly realistically drawn manga cartoon? All I know is when I watched Bugs Bunny and the Roadrunner, I started that at 2 years old. I don't remember the trauma. Now, perhaps I'm sublimating it, but some of this is just fun. Some of it is more realistic.
那律师呢？
我认为这个片子上应该要加一个好孩子切勿模仿。这样家长看到了也会跟孩子，如果他不识字的话，可以跟他解释一下。哎，你看归看是这样的情况，但是你不能学哦。
3岁到5岁的孩子切勿模仿这4个字儿，他首先认不全，即使认全了，他也不知道那是什么意思。
现在小孩子他的接收信息的渠道很多，都比我们小时候聪明的多了。
你可能得画一个叉，告诉他这个事情不能做就完了。
Chris, what do you think? Appropriate or not?
Yeah, I would actually agree with what Tom said. I think the stuff that's very caricatured and very and sort of crazy looking, that's a lot more easy to distinguish as fake and fun than the more realistic stuff like the manga style drawings of the person just floating. That was very sinister, a little bit scary. I remember when I was young watching, kind of coming across something like that quite late at night on TV, and I just turned it off because I didn't like it. I was scared.
The Asian manga style is much more realistic, except for the big blue Sailor Moon eye.
老公，你觉得？
我觉得都可以，
都可以。
只要有孩子有人告诉他们说这个你不要去学啊就好了。
你觉得5岁的小孩旁边有个家长跟他说看吧没事儿，只要你不这么做就行。
对啊。
好吧。
真的吗？
Really?
我觉得大部分都是可以的，只要没有血没有刀就是可以了。
Okay, that was a nice discussion. We know as the very first case of its kind in China, the Pleasant Goat case, it's still being on trial, and it will definitely receive a final legal judgment sooner or later. And maybe it will serve as the example of future cases of similar nature. You know, you never know what's going to happen. But at the same time, in areas where the legal system is still being developed, maybe all of us should be more proactive. Now, before we go, I actually have some good news for most of us. I think I'm not sure if it's good news for Chris. In the latest theater edition of Pleasant Goats, they've deleted most of the violent scenes. So thank you very much for being here with us today on Voices, and hopefully we'll see you again next time.
应该是政府直接站出来去替那个制作公司承担责任。
The studio has every right to make any product it wants.
我们国家的法律是这样的，就是法院是不告不理。
It's our responsibility as parents and as people to limit what we are going to.